Can just anyone join the choir, or is it no one else is allowed? Is that what my understanding? Other people are welcome to? I see open arms come. Okay, great. Yeah, please. Okay. If you sing in the shower, come on down. Stand in the light and be seen who you are. Oh. Be heard for who you are. A reading to start with Jake Morrill, a mentor of mine, singing out for love's return. He starts with a quote by Mechtild of Magdeburg from Germany in the 13th century. The soul, this theologian of 13th century Germany wrote, the soul is made of love and must ever strive to return to love. Therefore, it can never find rest nor happiness in other things. It must lose itself in love. By its very nature, it must seek God, who is love. So, Jake writes, for 12 years, Daisy has been the best dog any person could love. But last week, when she disappeared into the woods, that wasn't what I was thinking. As I tramped along the wet trail calling for her, other words came to mind. We rambled together through these woods for years. Well, I ramble. She bounds. Even now, slowed by arthritis, something out there makes a puppy of her. So mostly, she remains a black blur through the trees. After a while, I turn back and she meets me at the trailhead, except last week, when for the first time she didn't. I had to walk back up the trail into the woods, whistling, singing out, Daisy, Daisy, here, girl, like a fool. Which is how it is sometimes between me and God. Some know God as a thunderstorm, scary, overwhelming. Others as a porch light, steady, soft, always on. But I like a Celtic image for the Spirit, a wild goose. Untamed, ungoverned by our words, our demands, our categories of mind. A wild goose goes where it will. For Christians, he writes, Lent is a wilderness time. Lent is a wilderness time, a time when it's not clear how or if love will win in the end. A time to ponder love's elusiveness, its absence. I've known times when I've wandered bereft. Maybe you have as well. What if love wasn't a far porch light toward which we had to trudge? What if it was a wild goose, a wet dog? Instead of some grim pursuit in our desire to meet it, we'd be compelled to sing out, to invite, to entice it. In the end, Daisy returned, very pleased with herself. But before, in the woods, when I thought she was gone, all I knew was my part, to sing out her name. The idea of Lent that I knew about growing up was that you give something up, right? That's the popular understanding of this Christian liturgical season that started just on Wednesday. And I remember starting to learn that maybe there was something more than just giving something up when I was a chaplain, and we would do Ash Wednesday. We would put ashes on the face or the foreheads of anyone who wanted ashes. And as a Unitarian minister in formation, I was a little trepidatious at first about this ritual practice, but found immediately just how first of all, everyone wanted the ashes. Everyone working at the hospital, it wasn't just Catholics, everybody wanted this intimate ritual of connection with someone who was there just to care for their spirit. But the meaning is this dust from which we come, to which we shall return, this reminder of our impermanence and fragility. In some Christian theologies, that reminder of impermanence and fragility has been tied to the theology of atonement, that we are born in sin and we have something that we need to make up for, right? And that self-sacrifice of the season, when practiced under that frame, the self-sacrifice becomes about self-abnegation, right? About making oneself smaller or less, about feeling like the ashes that you're putting on your forehead. And I think that's what turns so many of us off about Christianity and about certainly the practice of giving something up for Lent. Does anybody do this? Does anybody give something up for Lent? I know there are UUs who do this. Yeah, a few of us. It doesn't necessarily have to be giving something up either. You might take up a practice, start something new, add something on. What I've come to think of it as, and I think that Jake's invitation to understand this as a wilderness experience, this time of being in the wilderness, is that Lent is a time to focus on letting go or changing the relationship we have to one of the ways that we habitually protect ourselves from the world. The world, the raw experience of life is always dangerous, always risky, always coming at us with illness and age, with injury and heartbreak. And we find ways to cope with that, right? We find things to do to protect ourselves from being buffeted by all the challenges the world throws at us. And the practice of Lent is to say, I'm going to, just for this period of time, I want to be a little bit more in touch with the buffeting of the world. I don't know if it's going to work or not. I don't know if my wild goose chase is going to end in a wild goose or a rich and sweet spring or nothing at all. Nothing but scraped knees and torn clothes. But I'm going to try it still. I'm going to move towards the world showing my vulnerable belly. And I think that that's connected to this idea that we're going to be working with this month. So we're going to try and track Lent here these next several weeks, see what that might lead us to. But we're also in our Soul Matters work. We're in renewing faith is the theme this month, and I think that is a stance of faith to say, I don't know if it's going to work or not. I don't know if I'm going to become the person who I've always dreamed of being, bring myself alive, embrace the world, or fall on my face. But I'm going to bring my vulnerable belly, my softer, more tender parts into contact with the world anyway, because I need to chase that wild goose. And I think that there's a tremendous power and freedom when people take this stance. It's the stance of saying, I can't be concerned any longer with whether the world sees me as a fool. I can't be concerned about being humiliated or ashamed. I'm going to rip that zipper open anyway and throw my underwear around the airport. Do you know people like that? Have you seen people who walk around the world unafraid of being humiliated or embarrassed? And the power that has, the way that the world responds. I remember a story about Tony Robbins. He was that, a prominent life coach guru kind of a guy, gets people to walk across hot coals. He would always have this big event that would happen at a huge venue, and every time in preparation for it, he would have a negotiation with the CEO of the company that owned this building. And it was always this big confrontation. They'd get to the moment of the meeting, and they would always have one more thing that the guy would ask for, just a little bit more, just to this and that. And Tony Robbins was so sick of that cycle, of that staying in that locked-in dynamic. He showed up to the meeting one day, and they're all wearing their $10,000 suits, and it's on the 10th floor of the whatever high-rise building. And as soon as the guy starts launching into it, Tony Robbins pulls out a squirt gun and starts shooting him. And they all cracked up and said, fine, let's just do what we agreed. What does it take to live like that? I think that it takes getting that zipper unstuck. I think shame is a stuck zipper. Do you remember as a kid, maybe once, many of us had that experience of a zipper on our skin? Oh, and never again, right? And I think that's that's shame. Shame is that zipper on your bare skin, stuck and in pain and unable to. And to release it requires being willing to take that vulnerable part of ourselves and actually make contact with the world. And I think that that's actually where creativity, where inspiration, where the excitement of something new comes from, is from the vulnerable self making contact with the world. In process theology, which there's a lot of dimensions of process theology, but it's the idea that God is a verb. Just let that one sink in for a second, because I even now, I've talked about this for years, but God as a verb, even now it's hard to really imagine, okay, to God. So if God is happening, it's not even God is happening, God is the happening, right? So we are Godding in relationship. So to God is to encounter the world with our vulnerability so that something new and creative might unfold. And in doing so, tugging open one of those stuck zippers, it requires a lot of faith, because you're going to look like a fool while you do it. You can't help it. When one of those dramatic moments in my life when I did this was the first time that I experienced what I variously call mania or psychosis, and also a spiritual awakening and profound revelatory experience. And I was out at Vassar College, and I had spent 2 days not sleeping and going out of my mind and into something else. And I got to the moment when I knew that I needed help. I was scared and uncertain and didn't know what to do, and could barely communicate with anyone. And I remember clearly the moment when I just decided to surrender. And the surrender in that state looked like taking off all of my clothes and walking around Vassar College campus at 3 a.m. in an early November morning and getting picked up by security. And the state of surrender was so profound for me that I was so glad to see security and glad to be ushered along from person to person until I ended up in a psych ward. The psych ward itself, not as glad about, but that moment of surrender. It's that moment of surrender. I still remember and I think is always, whether it's that dramatic way or in our everyday moments of surrender, is that invitation to chase the wild goose. Another minister colleague tells a story of his practice for Lent. He decided he was going to say yes to every request that came in. He set some boundary on it. He's not going to tell anybody that's what he's doing to make it authentic, and he's not going to do anything that's going to harm anyone. But he's going to say yes to anything anyone asks him to do for the next 40 days. And then he said, well, Ash Wednesday came and passed, and no one asked me for anything. And then the next few days came and passed, and no one asked me for anything. And he got through the entire season of Lent, got to Easter, and discovered that this practice of saying yes was no Lenten giving anything up, exposing himself to the world after all, because no one asked him for anything. And he had a couple of reflections on it. I mean, his idea was, well, I'm seeing my own social location more clearly. I'm a white guy, I'm clergy. What does it take for people to ask something of me? Maybe I'm really not as available as I might have thought, not as in relationship and making contact. And I think that's true, and I think there's another piece of what happened as well, which is that in our WASP culture, in our middle class, white, especially liberal culture, the cardinal sin is to be in need, to be needy, to not be self-reliant. The self-reliance, I mean, especially as Unitarian Universalists, our cult of self-reliance goes back to Emerson and his vision of what could be, while at the same time we were talking about on Wednesday in our theology over lunch, while at the same time his mom's doing his laundry still, right? The servants who are needed to make sure he has food on his table. But this idea of self-reliance has created so much shame around our neediness. And it's this shame that I think gets activated then when we come into contact with those who can't help but demonstrate their neediness. Right? When you see somebody who is suffering on the street, who is pleading for money, for whatever that need might be, I think the discomfort that we feel is our own shame about our own neediness. So if you don't have a Lent practice already and you want to try one, this is my invitation to you. Find a way to love yourself in your neediness. Love your own vulnerability, your own radical dependence on others and the world. Close with a poem from Derek Walcott. You might have heard this one from me before. He was a poet of the West Indies. He spent most of his life in Trinidad, and he got the MacArthur Genius Award. Just quite a man, poet and a playwright. This is his poem, Love After Love. The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself, arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the old photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. May it be so. and amen.